Hi, I'm Amor. You play games, I make games. Has this ever happened to you? Man, I was working on a file in Photoshop. I closed it yesterday, went to sleep, opened it today, and turns out it got corrupted. Or I have this multimedia assignment all safely kept in my trusty USB drive. But oh no! The drive no longer responds. Or I lost it last minute. I know it has happened to me in the past. The way we can mitigate such problems before they arise is called source control. It's a term scary and often alien to artists, so I wanted to demystify it. Perhaps with more understanding and application in art, this might make your job easier. So, traditionally, source control is the practice of tracking or managing changes to code, which sounds scary but really doesn't have to have anything to do with code at all. In game dev, source control is one of the easiest ways to practice version control when collaborating on the same files and the most common. In this case, the version part of version control stands for game version, and in our case, it will be file version. The way source control works is by chronologically logging your changes through GitHub. People have a choice of a large variety of apps to do this through on desktop, but they all ultimately go through GitHub. I alone have 5 of those, because every team I worked with insists on using a different one. But the differences are really minute in essence. Not to mention, if you know what you're doing, you can collaborate cross-platform, since, you know, they all use the same GitHub repository anyway. I personally use GitHub Desktop. It can be found here and downloaded here. This used to be called just Git, so if you're ever having issues with and looking for tutorials online, don't be surprised if the old name comes up, it's still the same software. If you are planning to do coding in the future, out of the 5 I've tried, I would personally recommend Fork. That is because when working in group projects, it highlights version merge errors quite nicely. But like, all of them have very similar versions of this feature anyway, so do not stress too much, especially if your team ever requires you to download a different app. Again, I'll be using GitHub Desktop app because I'm lazy and boring. To actually get started, first thing you do is create a GitHub account. As stated earlier, you will need this no matter which source control app you use. Then let's get the desktop app. I'll give you a second to install one. If you have any problems with the installation, just follow the instructions on that page or Google it. I am more here to explain what is happening than how to do it, because once you know what's going on, you can just search it up very easily. So when you log into your GitHub page in your browser, you will see your repositories. At the moment you will have none, but it will allow you to create a new one. But hold on, what is that? Each repository is a project tree. It contains notes on all your files and their past changes. If you are ever on a different device, for example, it will allow you to download all that information and project files through whichever desktop app you use. So very useful, especially if there is a change you want to go back on that was made on a different device. When you go into the app and into current repository, it will have an add option and a drop-down menu. The clone repository is usually used when working with other people, e.g. group projects where you're working on somebody else's project tree. Add existing repository is for working on your own project tree saved online. You remember how earlier in the browser you had the option to create a new repository? If you had done that, that's how you grab it. And of course, it is also how you work on the same past project on a different device. The Create New option is what we'll be selecting here. When you click it, it will prompt you for a name and description. Fill those out. Then the important part here is the local path. You will see why this is important in a hot second, but for now just make sure you know and remember where the new repository folder will be made. The rest of that git ignore and license isn't really important for us, so just ignore it and press the create repository button. Great, we're almost done. If you open up your folder file repository now, you will notice that when you drag any files in there, it will show up as a change in your GitHub desktop. Great, good. Let's label what happened, name, which will be visible in your change tree, and description, which will be readable when you click on the changes or commits. Then press commit to main. Main in this case refers to the main branch. If you are ever working on a custom branch, that will show up instead. Then, once the file is committed, go to history. You can see that this change has not been uploaded yet. Click in the top left repository button, and it will come up with the push, pull, fetch, etc. buttons. We are interested in push. Click that. Now we're done, your changes are saved in GitHub. Quick note about the other options. You have to use them when working with others or across devices. Fetch grabs information about the changes from GitHub. Pull installs those changes onto your computer, so when working with other people, always remember, commit your changes. Fetch any changes other people may have made while you're working. Pull said changes, only then push your own. Repeat with me, commit, fetch, pull, push. Here, I should probably warn you about merge conflicts, which is what happens when the changes someone else made directly conflict and impact the changes you have made and GitHub doesn't know which to choose. Solving them can be a pain, but it mostly comes down to choosing whose changes stay and whose changes are erased forever. If you're using source control just to keep track of and prevent corrupted files, you don't need to worry about it. Speaking of why we're here and corrupted files, whenever you make changes to that Photoshop file in your repository and save it, it will come up as changes in your GitHub desktop app. Commit those when or before you're about to do anything of substance, and of course push. If you don't push, all of your commits will be combined into one and you won't be able to go back. Then, whenever you want to go back and just can't, like if you opened and closed the file or it just got corrupted, simply right-click on the particular change you want to revert to and press Create a Branch from Commit. Now reopen your file from its repository folder location and you will note that all your past changes have been unmade. This is essentially the equivalent of loading up a past save file from before you mucked up in a video game. Pretty neat. That's all you really need to know to get started. So a couple of other notes about this whole process. In other source control apps, the History tab of commits usually looks like a tree diagram. Yes, much more visual than GitHub desktop and self-explanatory. Suddenly on this branch and main business makes sense. In other apps, the method for reverting to a past commit may likely be done differently. And also when making a new branch, it may require you to push it before you can actually use it. Last little thing, remember you can make different repositories for your different projects. Alright, this was Emorph. I hope this video helped you and your friends understand what you're doing. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you in the next one.